want to let him hear? So I'm like, you gotta keep it. I like the metro. So what are you doing? Okay, thank everybody for being here. My name is Richard Kirk. I'm with the Critical Planning Journal. I'm the managing editor, along with the co-managing editor over here, Derek Beam. We're excited to have you all here this evening in this beautiful space. So this is in partnership with the UCLA Institute on Inequality and Democracy, and also, of course, the Los Angeles Poverty Department, which owns and controls this beautiful museum space, the Skid Row History Museum and Archive. Yeah, thanks, LAPD, seriously. And we want to encourage you also after the event, if you didn't get a chance before, to look at some of the wonderful art on the walls made by the members of the Skid Row community here, some of which is for sale, by the way. They did not ask me to say that, but it says it on the tags. So consider that. So also, we have Rostin Wu here, who I would like to just mention. Hi, Rostin.
Hello.
So he has a poster that he's showing on the wall over here, and also it's a forthcoming exhibition, but we want him to come up and briefly take my mic from me.
Oh, okay.
If you would not mind.
Sure.
Do it all the way.
I'll take the mic. Very quickly. Hi, I'm Rostin. I work with Los Angeles Poverty Department very frequently. You're inside of the Skid Row Housing Museum and Archive. One of the things we try to do here is, well, we have an archive of Skid Row and housing. And it's a pretty incredible set of materials documenting downtown Los Angeles for many decades. And one of the things we try to do is make that archive speak to the present moment. And so there's a pretty large set of materials about the conversion of residential hotels to supportive housing in the 80s and 90s. And those hotels are now today, as many of you I'm sure know extremely intimately, in crisis again, in a different way. And so we're doing a project over the next several months, let's say. We'll be having little excerpts from that archive, screening them and having conversations about what can we learn from that moment and what can we bring to today's organizing. So a little first piece of it is this poster that's over there. It says Hotels in Crisis at the top. At some point when people are not dropping amazing knowledge, please look at that poster, add a little bit to it. We're kind of collecting ideas of what needs to change to fix these spaces in the present moment. What can we learn from the past, from the future, from elsewhere? That's it. Thanks, Francis.
Thank you.
Also, want to think about it. Thank you to the LA Tenants Union downtown local chapter for letting us use this space. They usually meet in here about this time. So, who here is from LA Tenants Union downtown? Nice. And before we also formally start, I want to introduce Carla from the Institute on Inequality and Democracy to tell us a little bit about an event they're having in a couple days. Would you like to use the mic?
No, I don't need the mic.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. I just wanted to tell you about an event. Oh, maybe I should for other purposes. All right, this is a little bit better on me. I was on The Price is Right this week, so weird story. Talk to me afterwards. But I just wanted to do a quick plug for an event that we're doing at the Institute on Friday called Beyond Sanctuary. It's an all-day convening. I'll just read a little bit, and feel free to take a flyer or talk to me afterwards. This will be at UCLA from 10 a.m. to 4:30 this Friday. Sanctuary as promise and problem casts a light on the place of racial others in the liberal democracies of the West. This convening marks the publication of Beyond Sanctuary, The Humanism of a World in Motion, which thinks across the US and Europe to critically interrogate policies and philosophies of sanctuary and asylum. Taking place in occupied Los Angeles at a time of resurgent white nationalism, these dialogues are intended to resituate the Imperial West in the global histories and possibilities of decolonization and abolition. So some of the presenters will include Lupita Limon Corrales, as well as me and my brother Anthony Orndorff in conversation around what it means to recognize art beyond witness. So there's a lot to be said about sanctuary, but there's even more to be done around building what is needed to protect each other and to keep one another safe. We live in a sanctuary city, and we know that that means nothing in practice without community self-defense, without protecting and organizing in our neighborhoods. So if you're interested, we welcome you on Friday all day. Lunch will be provided. We'll have great conversation, and we look forward to making connections with you there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Do you have flyers? You still have some flyers that you're going to pass out? Okay, amazing. Okay, let me make sure I get this right. So, tonight's conversation centers on the relationships that define everyday housing struggles in Los Angeles, the ties, tensions, and negotiations between tenants and landlords. We're going to hear from a diverse array of panelists here who are going to talk about their work at different scales, some of which involve individual eviction cases to citywide campaigns and experiments in collective ownership. We're going to consider how short-term fights and long-term visions can align to create more just and durable forms of housing. So as we start, our panelists are going to discuss the state of tenant-landlord relations. Then we're going to move on to strategies and into the future of these relationships. And we're going to do our best to have enough time for questions and open dialogue as well, which I think might be perhaps the most important part of this conversation. Because it is, I do want it to be very conversational. We want it to be conversational at the critical point. So I want to start by reading introductions for each of our panelists, which I have prepared here. Chelsea Kirk, they're going to be in order, by the way, from my left, this way. Chelsea Kirk is an organizer, researcher, and policy advocate in Los Angeles. She has long been active in the tenant movement, organizing with the Los Angeles Tenants Union and doing policy work with the Strategic Action for a Just Economy. Over the years, she has engaged with the tenant struggle from multiple vantage points, as an organizer, as a policy advocate, as a former legal assistant supporting tenants suing slumlords, and now as part of the Rent Brigade, a research collective founded in the aftermath of the wildfires to support autonomous tenant groups on the ground. Takao Suzuki, during his 25-year tenure at Little Tokyo Service Center, Takao has held positions of a community organizer, project manager, and real estate director, as well as community development director. He began his tenure at Little Tokyo Service Center as a community organizer through the LTSC AmeriCorps program, and in 2004 he joined the real estate development department, overseeing the completion of over 300 affordable housing projects, along with the Little Tokyo development of the California Japantowns project. He currently serves on the board of the Little Tokyo Community Impact Fund, Esperanza Community Housing Corporation, Mercado La Paloma Incorporated, and is on the Affordable Housing Advisory Council of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. He served as Los Angeles County Supervisorial District 1, appointed Housing Commissioner for the Housing Authority of the County of Los Angeles until May 2019, and is now a Housing Advisory Committee member of the Los Angeles County Development Authority. In 2019, he also joined the Real Estate Advisory Committee of NeighborWorks America. He holds a BA in social work from the California State University of Los Angeles and an MA in urban planning from UCLA. Kenia Alcocer is a housing rights and community organizer with Unión de Vecinos since 2003 in Boyle Heights, East LA, and Maywood, immigrating to Los Angeles as a small child, witnessing the '92 riots after the acquittal of 4 white police officers in the beating of Rodney King, and later navigating access to higher education as an undocumented person, organizing in the efforts that helped pass AB 540. These have been some of the forces that have shaped Kenia Alcocer's life and work. Now, as a mother, she continues to fight to build a world free of poverty, systemic racism, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the distorted narrative of white Christian nationalism through spaces like Freedom Church of the Poor, the Poor People's Campaign, University of the Poor, and the International People's Assembly, because our struggle is local, national, and international. Alexander Ferrer is a PhD student and researcher at the UCLA Institute on Inequality and Democracy, where he studies the business practices of corporate landlords. He is currently working with a debt collective supporting tenants and former tenants, organizing against one of the country's largest landlords. Chris Tyler has been organizing with the Los Angeles... Chris has been organizing with the Los Angeles Tenants Union since 2019, when chronic habitability issues in his first LA apartment led to a meeting of the Vibe local chapter. Since then, he's devoted his life to to the fight for land and housing, organizing his neighbors, fighting evictions, coordinating union-wide assemblies, educational programs, traveling to Venezuela to learn from leaders of the Socialist Communal Project, and helping co-found the downtown LA local chapter in 2023. Currently, he stewards organizing efforts for the SRO tenants of the Rosslyn Hotel and commercial tenants on Santee Alley. During the day, Chris serves as a communications manager at Strategic Actions for a Just Economy, where he draws on knowledge from years in the struggle to advance community-oriented campaigns for tenant rights, healthy housing, and equitable development. He also leads SAJE's work in the No Olympics LA Coalition, organizing against the harms of the impending 2028 Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games. He is a founding member of the BAM Union, the first administrative workers union in the Brooklyn Academy of Music, organized with UAW Local 2110, and holds degrees in theater, arts, and English literature from Brown University. Applause for Clarence. Okay. Thank you all again for being here. So for the first section, we're starting with the everyday realities of renting in Los Angeles, the challenges that tenants face and the relationships that shape them. And we're going to hear from each of the panelists about when and how they get involved in tenant-landlord disputes, what kinds of issues they are seeing most often, and who these tenants and landlords are. The first question, I'm going to see if I can have a seat if more of this is feasible. I kind of don't like being able to see, not being able to see people in the back. I'm going to keep standing. You know, I mean, maybe if should I stand or sit? Sit? Eric says sit.
Get comfortable.
Up, down, up, down.
Join us down here.
Down there. I'm trying to be disparaging. In between, like squat? Yes.
Kneel on the chair.
I don't have the legs for that. I don't know that. Okay, so the first question that we have for you guys is when do you, as tenant rights activists, get involved with mediating tenant-landlord relationships? What are some of the most common and urgent issues that you're seeing right now? Who are these tenants? Who are the landlords? Broad questions, and these are intentionally broad. We want to give you room to breathe and take it wherever you like. And also, I mean, I can do it in order, or you can sort of popcorn whatever, or if you have something to say, it's totally fine. I think for the purposes of this, I'm just going to start with Chelsea. I'll just do it that way.
I think we're sharing a mic. Yeah, I'm sure other people on this, there's lots to talk about, and lots of different ways landlords abuse tenants, from refusing to make repairs, to aggressively harassing them, to evicting them either legally or illegally. Basically, there's an assault on tenants in Los Angeles, and in particular tenants who have lived in their homes for a very long time and who landlords basically see as standing in the way of greater profits. I want to talk about something I'm seeing more often, which is that landlords are getting more and more clever about sidestepping rent control and sidestepping tenant protections. Something I'm seeing a lot more of lately in particular are schemes to evict tenants and convert their rent controlled housing into forms of home ownership. And what I mean by that, I'll share an example. So a couple months ago, I was meeting with tenants who lived in a bungalow court on the west side of town. And one of the tenants I was speaking with, she was in her 70s, and she was packing up her home of over 20 years because the building she lived in had been bought by one of these companies that buys distressed properties and flips them. And so shortly after there was notification of a new owner, all the tenants got eviction notices. And this was a 10-unit apartment building. And the reason was for something called a tenancy in common conversion. What that is essentially a way to turn rental units into condominiums where each one is sold off individually. And this is entirely legal under the Ellis Act. It's essentially a loophole, right? Because the Ellis Act says a landlord could exit the rental market, and by turning these apartments into these owner-occupied units that you can sell off, you're no longer in the rental market. It doesn't function as a rental anymore. And I'm just afraid that landlords are recognizing that these types of schemes are a really quick and entirely legal way to make enormous profits very quickly. The landlord in this equation in particular is no longer having to rely on what we all see, which is harassment or fabricated eviction claims to replace one rent stabilized tenant with another. Instead, they're actually just simply removing the building from the rental market altogether to make fast profit. And just to give you a sense of like the kind of financials here, in this case that I mentioned, each of those 10 units is currently being sold out for $800,000. So the landlord is going to make $8 million off of this rental property and bought it just a couple of years ago for $5 million. That is enormous profit to make in a short amount of time. And so I'm just afraid we're gonna start seeing more of these schemes, right? Like we're moving towards like just terminating the landlord-tenant experience and losing our rent-stabilized housing stock.
So, we're a nonprofit, Little Tokyo Service Center. We're actually just down the street. We're celebrating our 45th anniversary this year. And we started out as a social service agency, and we actually got into the work of housing due to the need. There was a building in Little Tokyo called the San Peter Firm Building, and it was city-owned at that time in the 80s, and throughout its most of its lifeline there. And the city was actually going to raise that building. It was actually in pretty bad shape. No hot water. The elevator was broken, and essentially they were going to raise that entire block. We got involved because the Little Tokyo community started a community organizing campaign to try to save not just that block, but starting with that particular building. At the end of the day, long story short, the city council and the powers that may be at that time, essentially, I think got tired of seniors, people going into city council meetings, and essentially handed us the keys. And prior to that, we didn't know anything about how to operate a building, how to develop a building. And I wanted to kind of tell that story just to kind of give a little bit of background around how we actually got involved in housing. And since then, we've been developing housing and we've been operating housing. And for us, I think, to answer your question, and today I'm kind of wearing not less so the service hat or the supportive services hat, but really as a landlord developer. And it really does, I don't mean to simplify it, but it really is about increasing the points of engagement with all of our residents, whether it's our small business residents on the ground floor or residents upstairs. That involves providing culturally appropriate services, providing various language services. But at the end of the day, whether they're just living there, there's points of interaction that we could actually build in with regards to providing after-school programs, providing childcare, and whatnot. And it's really continuing that aspect of it. And to be really real about certain things, especially over the last 6 years, operating buildings have become really, really difficult. For us, 3 years ago, for instance, this is just one example, but our insurance costs increased by 350% across all our properties. And since then, our operating reserves at our properties have been depleting. Operating costs continue to go up. But all that to say is that for us, we really couldn't see a way out of it if we didn't create a roadmap to really build in sustainability for not just the operations of what we do as landlords, but to try to increase communication with our residents. And we really believe, and I truly believe that really is the starting point. I know I'm really simplifying things, but we really don't talk enough. During the pandemic, for example, I think that situation is one example of we kind of lost touch with people. People who had the luxury of like working from home or behind a computer continue to do so, while people on the ground, whether it was our maintenance folks, whether our resident service folks or whatnot, didn't have that option. And I think the nonprofit affordable housing field is currently going through that aha moment, because there are certain things that I think as an affordable housing developer and operator that we took for granted that no longer exists. And in short, it really is about finding that connection, whether it's from a landlord-resident relationship, whether it's through other forms of relationships, through the community, through various networks, but ultimately it does begin there.
Thank you. Kenia?
I think the question is, when do activists or tenant rights activists get involved in mediating tenant-landlord relations? I think that's all the time. I think that is a constant job of us as organizers to do so. And I think that as organizers, we also have to have clarity of class analysis, because we do have corporate landlords that are a huge enemy, but we also have owners that live in our communities, owners that are part of our neighborhoods, that we're not gonna get rid of. But we also need to change their minds and hearts, and that is also our job. One of the things that I would say, we have a lot of new landlords that are coming into our neighborhoods. There are more on the corporate side. We as organizers need to document the fact that as tenants, they are acting in good faith, trying to get the services that they deserve and need. And I think that if we don't do that part of the work, then we're also not teaching tenants the proper way in engaging with their landlords. If they receive written notices, you have to write your answer in writing, right? It's not just about getting notices and throwing them to the trash that can get you evicted. It's also like teaching tenants how to be active and be advocates for themselves as well. Putting complaints with the housing department. The housing department sucks, we know that. We know that all these agencies don't work for the tenant, but we need to make them work. And we need to make sure that we're documenting all of these things over and over again, because the reality is that whether it's a corporate landlord or it's a small owner in the neighborhood, they all have the resources to take you to court, right? And that is one of the places where a lot of people are ending up. It's in the court system, where they don't have any evidence to protect themselves, where there's not enough lawyers or funding for lawyers for them to be able to access. Therefore, they need to start developing that process from the get-go. Once we knock on a door, the first thing we teach tenants is that it is their responsibility, and they do have responsibilities as tenants to document things, and to let their landlords know what is it that they need, and to fight for their rights. And part of my job at Unión de Vecinos has been to actually sit down with tenants and landlords and mediate stuff. Things that sometimes are simple. I'll give you an example. I have a landlord that lives in the front, a tenant that lives in the back, Jacqueline. The lady hated our tenant for some reason. Like, she really disliked her. The husband was more, he just didn't want to hear it from his wife, so he was allowing his wife just to do crazy things. Called the cops at 9 at night because the lady was cleaning her house and put some music on. New Year's, she wanted them to stop their party at 10 p.m. She couldn't celebrate her kids' birthdays in the yard. Like, very ridiculous things. And I mean, sitting down with them and letting them know, I was like, no, actually she's paying her rent. She has the right to enjoyment of her housing. She has a right to have her mother visit from Mexico once a year and stay in the home for like 2 months. Yes, you can increase the rent for 10% for that extra month that she's gonna be staying there, but no, you need to reduce that when she leaves. Like, having those hard conversations, this lady, after that, drafting an actual contract with both of them of like what the tenant's rights were and what the landlord's rights were, putting it in writing and having them sign it. And then, I mean, living for the next 5 years in peace, and then it started up again, and then again stepping in. So things like that, it's something that we have to navigate on an everyday basis. And I say it's our responsibility because if we start with organizing with animosity, we get to leave. The tenant stays. The harassment that the tenants go through on an everyday basis with some of these landlords is horrific. We just go and light fires. The tenant's the one that's shutting out that fire, not us. I mean, I can't be at every single tenant's home whenever a landlord goes off. We have created rapid response networks where we are responding to emergencies, but it's not fair for tenants for us to start emergencies when we aren't able to respond. Therefore, it is our job to start in good faith with mediations with tenants. I'll give another example, and the reason why I say there's corporate landlords we need to fight with, and then there's other homeowners. I have these landlords, their parents are undocumented, they are DACA recipients, they're buying off buildings in the city of LA, they're from Inglewood, they didn't know about rent control. So they bought a building. All of my tenants are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, have been living in this building for the last 35 plus years. The tenant that pays the most rent, it's $411. Okay? The tenant that pays the least rent, it's $256. She's the one that's been living there the most. And so you have these tenants and they thought they could just come and do their cash for keys, give them the $25,000, they will all move out. Everything's gonna be nice. They're gonna be able to tear down the building, rebuild something bigger and make a profit off of it. And then when they realized all of my tenants are protected tenants, which means that under the LARSO, if you've been living there for more than 10 years, you're 65 years or older, they cannot evict you for tenant occupancy or any other reason on the reasons for eviction. I mean, Ellis is exempted from that, but they'll give them a year, right, to live there while the Ellis process goes through. And they bumped themselves with this brick wall where they can't evict their tenants. And so what they did is they went and removed all of their laundry services. Brought the housing department to determine that the laundry services were illegal, removed them, made huge holes on the walls. For an entire year, the tenants had these huge holes on their walls. We were pushing and fighting for them to fix it. But you know what? The other thing is that they need to learn, right? And so we're like, we're gonna fight and push it. Maybe we'll do repair and deduct. That was a campaign we were thinking about at the moment. And then we push our connections and our work that we've been doing with the housing department. We sped up the process for REAP. And so the building got its REAP hearing. A week before the REAP hearing, all of the apartments were fixed. It wasn't that they couldn't do it, it's that they refused to do it and they wanted the tenants to suffer, right? The raids come, one of the tenants are undocumented and they lost their jobs. So the daughter who is in college is the only one working. They started missing their rent and they just had a court hearing. And they were going to evict them because they weren't able to pay the rent because they were scared to go out and get abducted by ICE. And I was like, dude, y'all are your parents are undocumented. Like, you have the fortune to leave your parents inside their homes because you're all working, y'all have properties, but this family doesn't. And I went to them, I was like, look, if you evict these tenants, let me just tell you, the amount of protests you're gonna get at your parents' house, shaming the fuck out of you, because as undocumented people, you shouldn't be doing this to other undocumented people. So the deal was, they get to stay, pay rent starting January, and they're gonna have to wait for the debt that these tenants owe until we're able to apply for the rent relief program that is coming soon from the county. If they qualify. If they don't qualify, then we'll figure out a payment plan. But part of the deal also is, you know what? If you guys can't pay it, don't worry, because there is an actual physical campaign that we can build around this and shame these immigrants that are doing this to other immigrants. And that is the type of work that we need to do, and that is the type of mediation sometimes we need to do. That is, for me, it's also part of the mediation. We have to make these folks that are part of our communities, that are landlords, conscious of what they're doing. I don't think that they caught themselves at that moment. When I told her, I was like, your parents are undocumented too. Her face changed and she was ashamed. And I was like, but that is the thing that we have to do. We have to build class consciousness, not only on the tenants that are working, but also the landlords and the homeowners and the small mom and pops, because they are in the same place that we are. We cannot let them forget 2008. Your landlords are the fucking banks. You are not safer than us as tenants. If there's another housing crisis, you will be on the street right there with us. And that is also part of the mediation we need to do on an everyday basis. Knock on doors, talk to people. That's why for us as Unión de Vecinos, when we're talking about building by building, block by block, that does not exclude the homeowners in our block. They're part of the community, they need to be there for us. And that is part of the mediation we also need to do. It's everybody that lives in that community needs to get involved and needs to get engaged.
Incredible, thanks. Alex.
Thanks, Hal. I'm gonna just pick up on some of the stuff that Kenia and Chelsea were talking about. And that is to say that, like, I'm often in a support role. I work at the Tenant Power Toolkit, so we do a lot of, direct kind of like, client-facing work. In my organizing life, I mostly organize with former tenants who are fighting against their rent debts to previous landlords, and I'll get into that later. But I think, what I think is the key issue often is like the impunity that landlords feel. Like Kenia was talking about the refusal to fix the problem. It's not about the inability to fix the problem, it's about the refusal to fix the problem. And that impunity is kind of empowered by a totally functionless enforcement apparatus that we have for tenants' rights, for habitability, for basically everything that involves tenants. And that's the reliance on affirmative defenses that force tenants to prove their claims, right? Force them to enact their own defenses, force them to press their own rights under the threat of eviction. That's the total balkanization of the process of regulating the housing situation. Like they do code enforcement on a unit by unit basis, right? They do code enforcement maybe at the scale of a building, but nobody's looking at if this landlord is running 10 buildings in the same way until they land on a bunch of REAP lists, right? And that's also, I think, what informs like the scam-like quality of the housing experience these days. That Chelsea was talking about, the schemes and scams to try to get around rent control. This is something that's really central to our campaign right now, which again I'll talk about in a bit. But this is informed by kind of the sense of impunity, and the real power that landlords have, right? That's conveyed to them by a system that protects their right to profit and their right to property more than it protects tenants. And so what that means is that there are things that they're doing that are of questionable legality. There are things that they're doing that are, maybe illegal if people read the laws the right way. There are things that they're doing that are just straight up illegal all the time, right? And the problem is that to catch them out in it is not even enough to matter, right? So I think for me, the mediation that I'm usually involved in is in helping folks navigate the formal processes for like trying to assert their rights, and we know that those don't work, right? And so we know that they don't work. So that means you might be facing a bullshit collections letter, but that doesn't mean that the collector is going to back off if you prove that you don't owe the debt, right? Because their business model, like the landlords, is to get sued and just collect more than they're getting sued for at the end of the day, right? And the landlords, when they milk these buildings, right, when they run the building down, when they file illegal eviction notices, they know that that's strategic, right? It's a certain proportion of their activities. Maybe they will get caught on it, but it doesn't matter because there's so many people who are just going to give up, who don't know, who can't press their rights, who can't navigate the system, and that's because the system just doesn't work, right? So I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. Chris?
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. So as a member of the LA Tenants Union Downtown Local, we are also always addressing landlord-tenant issues. Specifically, we address these issues when tenants enter the spaces that we organize and conduct outreach in. and articulate the issues that they're facing. One of these spaces is the Downtown Local Weekly Meeting, which is every Wednesday night right here in this room from 7 to 9 p.m. So welcome to the LA Tenants Union Downtown Local Meeting. Bart will be collecting dues at the door afterwards. Downtown is a very, very interesting and contentious landscape. We organize with commercial tenants, we organize with tenants in single room occupancy or SRO buildings, we organize with tenants in shelters and bridge homes. We also organize with middle class tenants who live in the condos that are also around us. For the purposes of tonight, I'm going to talk specifically about our work with tenants in the single room occupancy hotels, where we find that safety and dignity are the chronic crises that all of these tenants are facing. The conditions are squalid, uninhabitable. There is rampant harassment from management, security, police, caseworkers sometimes, frequent eviction attempts, especially against tenants who are organized. And the tenants in single room occupancy hotels are some of the most socially and economically vulnerable tenants who are housed. Most of them are on vouchers or enrolled in other programs to grant them housing. Their landlords are nonprofit housing providers. And so this creates a specific kind of tricky scheme to organize against, because these are functionally slumlords with social service missions. And these buildings function as a kind of liminal space in that they are both a space of intake for people coming off of the street who have been living outside, and they're also a site of expulsion where some of the most vulnerable tenants are then cast out back onto the street. Everything that we do is rooted in organizing. Organizing is kind of a spine that undergirds all of the mediation, litigation, advocacy work, organizing campaigns that we do in the buildings to improve the conditions and bring some dignity and safety back to the hotels, which ostensibly was their original purpose and the articulated intention and mission of the housing providers that are overseeing these squalid conditions. But we know that actions speak louder than words. And so we continue to organize and hope to see you here at one of the local meetings in the future.
So I know that some of you already shared examples of kind of some of the more pressing issues that you're seeing in terms of tenant-landlord relations right now, but I do want to give an opportunity if there are other examples that you want to give or something that comes to mind. There was the second question I had for verbatim is, could you share a relevant example from your work, maybe a particular housing site, landlord involved, and the main or recurring tenant issue you've been seeing, and tell us briefly if you or your organization have been fighting or researching that case. So we've already done some of that, I think, but if there's any additional examples, something important comes to mind, it's totally optional, feel free at this juncture to raise it.
I can
Takao? Yeah.
You know, I know you mentioned like SROs. So we do operate one SRO in Little Tokyo. We actually, there's no public funding associated with that building. And the reason that we actually...
So you say no public funding?
No public funding. We actually were able to purchase the building at below market rate because of the relationship that we had with the owner for many decades. It's on the historic district of the federally designated historic block of Little Tokyo on First Street. And you know, I bring this up because you know you made the comment about like SRO and the work that you're doing around SROs here in downtown, and I think that's really important work. The way we've been able to keep it affordable and keep it essentially provide quality housing is to do cross subsidization. You know, we are like owner restricted the building, so we're kind of we self-restricted the rents. We have 3 small businesses on the ground floor that we provide below market rent to, and with the cross subsidy, and you know, working with the county assessor's office, we were able to reduce our property taxes. It's become really hard to operate that building. It's 45 units. Rent collection has been has been on the decline, especially during COVID and after COVID. But our approach is that, you know, it's really eviction is kind of the last resort for folks that can even pay $5, $10 to get on a rent plan, like a rent payment plan. I think is a better approach because we provide homeless services as well, and it's easier to provide some services, to keep people housed. It's a lot cheaper to keep folks housed than you know, getting folks who are unhoused into housing, right? And that's really, I think, goes back to kind of our DNA. We do feel more obligation to keep folks housed and also protecting the folks that live in our buildings. I just wanted to kind of bring that piece up because I think there's a different model that us as a nonprofit, and not all nonprofits kind of take this approach, but there are different models that we could all like explore to actually make SRO housing a viable option here in downtown. So in any case, just wanted to add that comment.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why we invited you.
Well, I just wanted to say that there are the factors of like the tenant-landlord relationship, but there's also the reality in which all we're living in right now. I mean, starting from COVID, like we've been living from crisis to crisis to crisis, especially here in LA. We had COVID, the fires, I mean, the instability of eggs being so high at some point, then the ICE raids. So it feels like every time we're like facing another emergency and there's no political will to actually save us from being on the streets. And I think that it's important for me to say tonight that there is a campaign that we currently are fighting for with the LA Tenants Union, which is the eviction moratorium that is currently happening, and it's being discussed at the county level because the city obviously has no political will and does not want to touch it. And so there is something that we need to continue to have these conversations. During COVID, for 4 years, 4 years, we had an eviction moratorium and rent freeze. And it was possible. And I don't know of any fucking landlord that didn't have food on their table, didn't have a roof over their head, that could not survive without us paying their fucking rent. And therefore, we know that it is possible today to do the same thing. We need a rent freeze, we need eviction moratorium. Nobody should be forced to be out on the streets when people are being targeted. And this is no longer just about immigrants. We know US citizens are getting targeted. They don't give a fuck. They'll just arrest you, snatch you. You won't know if your family members are being taken away. This is the reality that we're living in. Now with this government shutdown, people don't have food to put on their tables. So choosing between feeding your family, I mean, we're back at food, not rent, again. And so therefore, it is our responsibility to continue to push all of these campaigns forward, because the reality is that it's not just the tenant-landlord relationship, it's that the system that we're living in is not sustainable for us.
Thanks. So that segues pretty well into the next section, which is about the toolkit that's available to us. To give a bit of context about this, I'm sure most of you are aware, that's about 70% of Angelinos rent their homes. More than half spend over a third of their income to stay housed. So that's like 1 million people are rent burdened in Los Angeles, more than 1 million. So those who are here could correct me with the latest updates on this. Since the city's pandemic protections expired, eviction filings have soared back to pre-pandemic levels. And it's like 245,000 some odd evictions, according to the LA City Controller, for the past couple of years. So we want to look at different approaches, legal policy organizing that are being used to keep people housed and building lasting stability. So the question, I have a couple of things I want to throw at you. The core question at hand here is so you have a range of strategies. Some are legal defenses to stop an immediate eviction. Others are like forming limited equity cooperatives or community land trusts. So I don't know if you were up to that. To aim for permanent change. But when is the short-term fight the right tactic, and when should feel free, by the way, to problematize the framing of this question. When is a short-term fight the right tactic, and when should we be directing energy toward long-term community ownership models instead or in supplement? So, broad question, I suppose, but Chelsea, you look like you have something to say.
You handed me the mic, so okay. Yeah, I mean, I would say that each fight demands a different strategy. I wear a lot of organizational hats, as my bio suggested. I do policy work, I organize with tenants at the building level. I also produce strategic research for campaigns, which is kind of my primary role in this eviction moratorium effort that we're demanding. And so I don't think there's a single playbook. Of course, organizations have different orientations towards similar end goals, but I think we always have to stay creative and responsive. And so one example that I think illustrates this that I was involved in was a recent fight where the Mohawk Street Tenants Association, which is a TA in my local of Latu, which is Echo Park, escalated their building level fight against rent evictions and actually won an amendment to the Just Cause Ordinance to ban rent eviction work as a basis for eviction in the city of LA for everyone.
Can we have a brief explanation of rent eviction?
Yes, so these tenants weren't rent stabilized. So if you're a tenant in Los Angeles that is only protected under the Tenant Protection Act, because you are not in a building that was constructed before 1979, you have much weaker protections, and a valid reason for evicting tenants subject to this law was substantial remodel. Meaning, like, if the landlord wanted to do a renovation project that was going to take over 30 days and presumably the tenant could not safely be in the apartment while it was happening, that tenant could be evicted. Which makes no sense, and this is not the case for rent stabilized tenants in Los Angeles. And so basically, just to share a little bit about that fight, to kind of show how we strategize different approaches, that fight began in a way that I think a lot of us who are tenant organizers on this panel are familiar with. The tenants got a new owner. It was actually, in this case, like a young 28-year-old investor. It was his first acquisition. And he immediately started a campaign of harassment against the tenants. And that went on for months and months. It looked like aggressive late-night cash or keys offers. It looked like sending illegal eviction notices for having plants on the balcony, a whole new set of rules. And this was during the COVID-19 era, so the eviction moratorium was in place. But the minute that lifted, the tenants all received, like almost overnight, eviction notices for substantial remodel, claiming that the tenants had to move out for kitchen remodels. The tenants did not need kitchen remodels, they did not want kitchen remodels. And this was, again, legal because that was an illegal cost for eviction. And so in our local, at the time it didn't exist, actually, this is one of the fights that kind of led to us forming the Echo Park local of the Tenants Union. Lupita, one of the main organizers, she was reached out to by the tenants. They heard of the Tenants Union by word of mouth, and she started assembling weekly meetings. And at some point I got involved in those weekly meetings, and we used those weekly meetings to launch like a building campaign. So we supported the formation of a tenant association. We strategized like a campaign to apply pressure to make the landlord do repairs, right? To eventually drop the eviction notices. And so when that first eviction notice came, the tenants were super stressed out. It's super daunting, it's super scary. The notice says you have to move out in 60 days. But we strategized like, okay, how can we get them to drop this, right? We did like a whole social media humiliation campaign. We eventually did this like very intimidating direct action campaign where we like cornered a lot of like property management staff and like demanded they drop the eviction. And actually like a couple days after that, they dismissed the eviction. And it was like, felt very victorious. It was like really exciting. We're like, cool, like we won. And then I don't even know if it was like a month later, we got the second eviction notice for the same reason, because it's legal to evict tenants for this reason. And so at that point, again, strategizing, direct action, what are we gonna do here? And we just sort of wondered, like, is this gonna keep happening? Is there something else we need to try? And we had the thought, like, what if we tried to change the law? And, when I wear my SAJE hat, I do policy work. So it's a universe that I'm familiar with in this role. And I actually felt kind of confident because of like what we were able to accomplish on the ground. We had this like great ground game that we could actually probably do a successful policy fight. And so we chose to, and yeah, we thought maybe we would fail, but you know what would actually be a failure is if we got a third round of eviction notices and the tenants gave up and left. So why not try? And so basically what that looked like was kind of like a partnership with SAJE and Law 2, where with my policy hat on, I took on the task of pressuring the council members and essentially lobbying them while the tenants continued parallel organizing, and we would cross ways when it made sense. But we never made policy the priority or the focus of the organizing, because that's something we believe when, you know, for those of us who do base building, policy work can be super demobilizing. It should not be the focus of I don't think it should be the focus of an organization. And so we went into this very aware of that. And so we were successful, actually. In May of this year, the city council voted unanimously to ban rent evictions as a form, as a basis for evictions in the city of LA. So like no one in LA will ever be rent evicted again. And yeah, so all that to say is like, you know, there are these, we can take multi-pronged approaches. Like we can think strategically about when it makes sense to file a lawsuit while we're organizing a building level campaign, if it's strategic, right? If it's a small landlord who doesn't have a lot of access to capital, maybe the lawsuit is gonna like freak them out because the lawsuit's gonna cost them money, especially if what they're doing is illegal. So we just have to be responsive and creative when we go into some of these campaigns.
Awesome, thanks.
No, I 100% agree. I think that, you know, you use the word like multi-pronged, and, you know, I think when it comes to strategies, whether it's short or like long term, I think it really depends on the moment that you're living in. Like right now, as we're up here and as we're all talking here, you know, all our safety nets have disappeared, or the trajectory of the safety nets that we had are on the downward trajectory. And those are people actually with safety nets, right? And I really do think that there's space for different strategies to be applied on a parallel track. You know, for us, when was it? Earlier this year, we completed a project in collaboration with the Community Land Trust in East LA, Fideicomiso Tierra Libre, who's a community land trust, and then and because we used a county program to purchase a property that the land trust Fideicomiso was organizing for a few years. Like we really kind of treat everything as like a partnership and collaboration when applying various strategies. So for us, it's kind of like we'll try all kinds of strategies. If it doesn't work, we'll kind of like shift. But like we still really believe that you know, it's, even though it's not like a novel idea, but for whatever reason in LA, like CLTs or land trusts hasn't really been used as a strategy for like many years, right? Like there are CLTs that's you know, in the city, in this county for decades, but on a scale level, it hasn't really caught on until really the last few years. And I think that's one model that you know, will promote ownership. The land trust will essentially own the land. The improvements will be shared. The improvements will be shared. The ownership will be shared amongst the residents living there. So that's like one approach. The other aspect of it is, you know, we receive a lot of government contracts, whether it's through LHD, whether it's through the state, and less so from HUD, but like when it comes to like project-based vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, you know, some of our residents, you know, utilize these products. And I think for us as an operator, we realize that like the system that we currently live in, we don't necessarily agree with, but if we're to dismantle this system right now, like overnight, and not comply to what we're obligated to do in terms of compliance to the city, the county, the state, and whatever other government agency, like we go into default, and we get into a situation that, you know, not too long ago, another nonprofit here in downtown went through. And, you know, our obligation is really the residents, and we put the residents first. So, like, we don't really want to compromise that at all, right? So, you know, I think for us, it's like this short-term fights that we try to get ourselves involved in, whether it's policy around tenant governance around the ULA, the United to House LA initiative that, you know, just last month released a lot of money to help preserve housing. And at the same time, like, I think there are, whether we like it or not, we do have, there's potential, like, big events coming to LA, right? Whether it's sport, you know, the sporting events, other events coming to LA. LA is a tourist destination, like it or not. And I think there's ways to leverage our place in the world as a city to actually leverage that to benefit the people who actually live here in LA. And all this to say is that I think the long-term mission, obligation, I don't know what you call it, really is to do a culture reset. You know, in this country, housing is not a right. And for us, like, I think that needs to change. And, you know, I think over the years of us developing housing, operating housing, and which is all affordable housing that we actually operate, we haven't forgotten the fact that, you know, we're all in our, you know, and every day I do wake up and hope that, like, my job no longer exists. And I tell my staff that, I tell everybody at LTSC that, and some of them think I'm like crazy, but like ultimately that's what we're shooting for, right? And I think we can't forget who we're actually working for. We're an extension of the community. And at the end of the day, I think the long-term strategy is to make housing a right, not just in this city, but in this country, right? And so I think there's strategies that could be applied to achieve that one day. But in the meantime, you know, we are at threat, whether it's on a federal level, from various, you know, from this current administration, whether it's this current system that we're currently living in. So I think there's strategies that could be applied, you know, with regards to some of those short-term kind of battles.
Well, I think it's safe for me to say that within Unión de Vecinos and the folks that we work with or our networks, the short-term and long-term goals are socialism. I think that it is important for us to say it up front because at the short term, we need to do the political education with our base and our members to live socialism on an everyday basis. And we say this because right now that we have these food shortages, and even during the pandemic, we started creating projects of survival. I mean, if the government and nobody else is gonna save us, we need to figure out how we're gonna save ourselves. Through learning from Venezuela's models of comunas, now we have a food production committee that is building gardens all over Boyle Heights to ensure that there's enough food supply for our members to have food during crises like these. When we're talking about this type of model, we're also having this conversation of who are the politicians. And politicians, we always see them as those people that we elect, but in reality, we're having a different conversation. We are the politicians of our communities. We are the ones that are responsible to come together, have conversation, and figure out what it is that we're building in our block, in our building, in our neighborhoods. It is our responsibility to figure out what kind of world we want to live in. And I think that for me, one of the biggest influence in the last 6 years has been the Apache stronghold. They are currently fighting for Oak Flat, a sacred place that a mining company is gonna come and destroy. And one of the things that, when Wencer came to Los Angeles and we did a tour of the different TAs that we have, they went to Flower Drive, to Unión de Vecinos, One of the things that he said is like, wow, you opened my eyes. Like, the Apache strongholds not only in Arizona. Like, your homes, your neighborhoods are strongholds that you all need to protect. They are strongholds that you need to take care of, because your homes are the place where you eat, you sleep, you pray. Like, they are sacred. It's not just sacred sites that we're protecting at this point, it's every single person's homes. And that is the way that we need to think about it. And within this mind frame, one of the things that we really need to start having conversation and discussion with our members and communities, what is land, right? What is housing? And who should have control over it? And why? And is control even the right word, right? We're here to protect Mother Earth. That means that we're here to protect our homes as well. If we're here to protect our communities, we need to start figuring out what is our responsibility to our neighborhood, our housing, our community. It is our responsibility to ensure that every single person has food on their tables, a roof over their heads, and their basic needs met. So when you see a lot of when they were reading my bio and you say, poor people this, poor people that, that is who is at the center of our work all the time. The poorest of the poor, those on the margins. And we have a saying, we are with the poor, not because they're good, but because they are poor. That means that every single person, no matter their imperfections, and let me tell you, in our communities, we have people that are racist, homophobic, machistas. We need to be patient with that community as well. We need to figure out how we engage with every single person. We have people that, transphobic, homophobic. Yet, we need to work with those folks, because those are the folks that are gonna build the different world. We are building a different member in Latu. A member that becomes committed, not to themselves and saving their homes, but becomes committed to their neighbors, becomes committed to their neighborhood, becomes committed to a cause, that it's bigger than them. That is the type of world we want to create. That is the type of world we're creating every day when committees are coming together, when people are meeting in these spaces. That is the job that we're doing. That is short term, that is long term, it is an everyday thing. And I just love when BJ Prashad, who's a dear comrade of ours, got asked the question, do you think China is socialist? And his answer was, China is an always process of becoming socialist. Socialism is a protracted process. It is built every day. That is our responsibility, to build that every day, to ensure that everybody has what they need every day, everywhere. And it's not just here in Los Angeles, it is in this entire country. And because I am an immigrant from Mexico, it is my responsibility to do this, not just to free myself here in Los Angeles, or to free all of the people who are living in the United States, but to also free my people in Mexico, who this country also fucks over. To free my comrades in Brazil and Argentina, in Africa, South Africa. That is our responsibility in the United States. We have responsibilities, not just to our local movement, but to our national movement and our international movement. What is happening in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Palestine, impacts us. And it is our responsibility to talk about that, even with our neighbors, so they can understand that is where we're going towards. That is what they want us to be, submissive. And if anything we're learning from Palestine is that we can become stronger even when they're trying to kill us. And that is something that it's also important for us to continue to do. Political education should always be at the core, and socialism, it is a long-term process. Woo.
I'm going to question your distinction between tools and solutions and defense and offense a little bit, and I'll do it by just kind of telling a story about the TPT and how the eviction defense ended up spawning a really, really big campaign that includes a rent strike, a debt strike, and a debt abolition campaign. And so, on the defensive side, there have been 27,000 evictions in LA up to October 1st. Not debt filings, unlawful detainer cases. And 17% of those these days are coming through the tenant power toolkit. So the TBT it's a legal mutual aid collaborative between Law 2, the Debt Collective, and LSP called ICLC and City Law Center that helps people file and answer in their eviction case. The first step of the UD, you automatically lose if you don't do it. So every case that we pick up is not a win, right? This is not a win for us to get a case. It means that the person doesn't have a lawyer. Best case scenario, they're probably in a tenant clinic environment, right? Getting some help to fill this out. But what it does do is it gets us to know a lot of things and to know a lot of people about what's happening in LA. And so, during the pandemic, right, it was popular at the time to say there never was an eviction moratorium. There isn't a real eviction moratorium, right? Because people are still going to be evicted. They're just going to be evicted later. We temporarily made it impossible to evict you on the basis of non-payment, but then at the end of the day, if the rental assistance didn't come through, if you weren't able to get back on your feet and pay that bill out, right? Like the tenant was left holding the bag at the end of the day, right? With massive debts that the landlord could call in as soon as the moratoria expired, right? And potentially without still, having any income to be able to pay. So we saw a huge surge of evictions. And what we saw using the toolkit that was totally surprising and unprecedented was that we also saw people with $10,000, $15,000 of rent debt. And we wanted to figure out what was going on there. So what we did is we called people up. Like the whole point of running this eviction defense collaborative is it gives us people's phone numbers to get organized with, right? It gives us people's phone numbers who are going through these things. And we found that there was like a couple really big corporate landlords who were driving this trend. Their tenants were so disproportionately rent burdened, they were so disproportionately indebted after the eviction cases, and we found that these landlords were filing 60, 70, almost 80% of their evictions in some cases on black tenants despite owning in places where there were very few black renters. And so we decided with this information to fuck up this landlord, basically. Like we wanted to run a campaign on this landlord, right? And I think that's one of the ways that the defensive struggle can become an affirmative struggle, which is to say that we designed a campaign with a specific actor in mind, and we designed a campaign that responded to the specific behavior of this landlord. And I'm going to describe how that went down, basically. So we started calling up all the folks who this landlord was evicting. We met with them. We got in touch with a TA that already existed in downtown, the Mosaic building. I think members come to the downtown local every once in a while. And also another building in Koreatown that we formed a tenant association in with. And I'll say there was actually some resistance at first to the idea that we could organize these buildings because these were big corporate landlords, prime location buildings. They look like luxury housing on the outside, right? But like going back to the kind of scam theory of housing that I was talking about before, like they're just as shitty and slummy as any other building in the city. And we have the data to show that the people who lived in them were just normal people, right? So our organizers were a little hesitant at first looking at the outside of this building, being like, it's middle class tenants, they're not gonna get organized. It turns out they had a lot of problems in these buildings, right? And it was just that regular people were being enticed by really low security deposits to pay really high rents that they couldn't afford because they had no other choice, right? And so what we found was that they just had like a totally insane pattern of tacking on all sorts of fees and charges on people. And then basically, if you didn't pay 100% of the rent, they would always evict you, right? That meant if you had any previous balance from the last month, they would say, no, you gotta pay it all in full. There's no repayment plans, there's no negotiation, there's no mediation, there's no sitting down with a tenant, you're just out, right? And the thing that the tenants were the most concerned about in the buildings were these utility bills. They were paying utility bills that were $200 a month for sewer and water alone, an extra $100 a month for trash. Like I saw a $500 utility bill on a 1-bedroom apartment from one of these tenants, right? These utility bills were absolutely like fucking crazy. And in some respects, they're already illegal, these bills, right? These are TPA buildings, like 1482, meaning they're under the state law, so you can only increase the rent, 9% a year or whatever last year. And with the utility charges, they were going up 12, 13, 14%, right? Every month even. And so it was already illegal. But that didn't really matter because the tenants, they couldn't sue about this really. They could withhold the charges, and that's what we ended up doing, launching a 6-month-long utility strike, which I'll get into in a second. But this company has this pattern of behavior where they've already faced dozens of class action lawsuits, and they just keep doing what they're doing, right? They don't care. They just pay the bill. So the tenants, even insofar as they were middle class and kind of predisposed to legal action, decided to form tenant associations, and they decided to go on a utility strike. And the insane, scammy nature of the bills actually made the utility strike in a weird way really, really successful. So we're in the 7th month of this utility strike now in Virgil Square and in Mosaic. There's still hundreds of tenants on strike, and $25,000 in utility bills were returned 2 months ago by this landlord. Basically an admission that they knew that these bills were fake, and they couldn't justify them, and they wanted to forestall getting sued by these tenants, right? And so there was a legal component. We had a lawyer working with us from Movement Legal, right, who wrote a bunch of scary letters, but this was not a class action lawsuit campaign. This was not an affirmative litigation case. This is a rent strike, right? This is a utility strike that the tenants decided to wage to do this. And so building on this experience, we're trying to build essentially a template that we know will work across this landlord's portfolio based on the practices that are happening in these buildings, which we know the tenants hate, which we know are illegal, which tenants have mobilized around, and apply that to build a campaign against this landlord who owns 300 buildings, 80,000 units across the country, right? And that's what it's going to take to beat this landlord, is to touch that whole portfolio, right? And so one component of this is to gather stories, attract regulatory information, attention, try to get somebody like the Attorney General to be like, look, these are clearly scam bills, like let's intervene in this situation. But really what it's about is about bargaining the terms of your tenancy, right? It's about saying this bill is ridiculous, we're not paying it, you can't justify it, and what we're gonna do is we're not gonna pay it until you agree with us on what's a reasonable utility rate for our building. Of course the tenants are saying they're not gonna pay anything that's not directly metered, right? But that's where you start. But to Chelsea's point, this actually necessitated us also to start a policy campaign in some respects. So we started with this eviction defense, and we ended up with a lawyer. We ended up with a national regulatory strategy that involved the Attorney General and the FTC, and we also ended up with a policy campaign in LA to ban RUBS. RUBS is the name of this billing mechanism. I'm sure you'll all hear about this campaign at some point, but so these two TAs with Law 2 are running a campaign now to change city policy to make this billing method illegal. And the reason for that is because we need to change this policy to change the circumstances in this building, right? It's not because we care about utility billing regulations, it's because in order to end this billing system, we need to change the policy. And by running this policy campaign, we get a new thing to talk about tenants in this landlord's other buildings about, right? Hey, you have this thing, you hate it, come to this meeting on Zoom where we'll learn about the illegalities of this practice. That's a light touch. But then come to this meeting with a TA at Virgil Square. Learn about organizing your neighbors, right? Let's form a TA. They struck, they won, you can do it too in your building. So that's one angle. And I'm just gonna take on the other part, which I briefly mentioned before really quickly, which is, what about all this debt I was talking about, right? There've been 230 tenants evicted by this landlord in the toolkit alone in LA who have over $4 million in back rent debt, right? Tons and tons of money, life-changing, life-ruining amounts of money for these tenants. They're never gonna be able to get into another apartment in the formal housing market, right? They've got 5-figure debts, they've got ruined credit, they've got an eviction on their record. And that's a situation that demands redress, right? Kenia was talking about crisis to crisis organizing before. Like these people, their lives were totally disrupted by the pandemic, and they've been forced into a position now where the formal housing market will never serve them. And that's part of the struggle that I think that we need to take up also. And so we organized a campaign of a debt strike, basically, saying we're not gonna pay the collections. Of course, these folks were never gonna be able to pay these collections either, right? They're not gonna get their wages garnished because they don't make enough money. They don't have any assets to seize. But the point is to politicize the material reality of their position. We can't be rehoused. This is unjust. It happened to us through no fault of our own because we're being denied the means to live. And this company needs to take responsibility, cancel these debts, clear our credits, right? So how do these two arms of the campaign articulate? That's what we're still trying to figure out, honestly. Like we were doing this on the fly. We launched the debt strike 2 months ago. You got thoughts about that? I'm happy to hear it. But that's where we're at, and that's how I think the defense can become offense if you think about it that way.
So in the downtown local, Whether it's a short-term crisis or a long-term vision for tenant stewardship and control of these buildings, we recognize that all of it quite literally needs to be organized. It can be organized in tenant associations, in neighborhood committees, in block associations, in commercial tenant associations. The forms look different depending on the constituency that you're working within, but there are really no shortcuts around this reality. And it is a slow and protracted process, as Kenia mentioned. We live in a society that is incredibly individuated. Everybody wants results really fast. People don't want to wait for things. And in the SROs specifically, we're working with tenants who are in a system where they themselves are highly individuated. They are living alone in single rooms by themselves. They are working with caseworkers. They are talking to people at HACLA, at HUD, at LAHD, at all of the various acronymed organizations that we interface with at the city, county, state, federal level. It's very challenging to navigate these infrastructures. And so we know that if we aren't doing the deep work of building relationships and logistical infrastructure and resiliency and capacity to respond to all of these crises as they emerge, we're not going to be able to weather the storms that we face, and we're certainly not going to be able to build new projects together. To give you a little bit of a sense of the work that we've been doing in the Rosslyn and a timeline that I think demonstrates very clearly the durationality of this process, we started outreach in the building in December 2022. By February 2023, we announced the Tenants Association to management, to the SRO Housing Corporation. And it wasn't until December of 2024 that management finally agreed to meet with us. So that's over a year and a half of our organizing. And in the meanwhile, they tried to evict 3 of our lead organizers with bogus evictions. We did win them all, officially the last one last week, so we can feel proud about that. Now it's challenging because when there are shorter term victories, it's also really easy to rest on your laurels and get a little bit comfortable and say, we're not dealing with an acute habitability crisis right now, and so maybe we'll get a little bit more lax. Maybe we'll take this week off from our weekly tenant association meeting. And then another crisis may hit, like it did earlier this year. On September 16th, a fire broke out, and one of our organizers in the Rosslyn Tenants Association, Billy Bob, was killed. This fire, we have reason to believe, was likely an electrical fire, given that for approximately 8 hours prior to the fire breaking out, there was intensive flooding all throughout the buildings on the 5th, 6th, 7th floors. Members of our Tenants Association called management, went down to the front desk, pleaded and said, it is flooding in my unit, the walls are buckling, we need to do something about this. And management did not do anything about this. 8 hours later, the fire broke out and Billy Bob is killed. And so I think it's important to note that, to honor Billy Bob, and also to remind ourselves that we can't get too comfortable in this organizing work, and we have to stay really dedicated, really focused, and really motivated to continue, so that in those moments when we're not facing an acute short-term crisis, we're organizing actively and proactively towards that longer-term vision. And so in the weeks since that, it has in many ways really re-inspired tenants in the building to come together. We're seeing more participation and attendance at our weekly meetings. We're in the process of building a plan for tenant stewarded security and safety. Specifically, we're using a system that we developed as part of the ICE Watch community self-defense work we did earlier this summer with whistles and notification processes to figure out ways that tenants in the building can notify each other when things are going awry, because we know that management, as it currently exists, is not going to respond in a meaningful way. and that we can't rely on the traditional notification systems like sprinklers, like fire alarms to alert us, because if they're even sounding, you can't always hear it inside of the units themselves. And so I share that mostly to emphasize that we would not be able to do any of this. We would not be able to be working in a meaningful way on developing new systems and strategies for response if we were not organizing, if we had not continued to meet every Friday for the last 2.5 years, which sometimes can feel aimless and it can sometimes feel unfocused, but at the end of the day, it is that repetition, it is the building of those relationships, and it is the strengthening of social bonds that creates the capacity and the possibility for the kind of transformation that we also desperately need.
Thanks a lot. I think, so in the interest of time, I'm going to change the order a little bit of what we planned, just ever so slightly. I know that some of you were particularly interested to answer the question about looking ahead, what can we expect for the future of tenant-landlord relationships? Where do you see the most significant pressure or most critical opportunity for tenants? And I think we can, if we can try to somewhat concisely address this, each of you, whether you'd like to answer or not, it's totally fine. But after that, I want to save time for kind of open discussion and Q&A with the audience. So if we can, again, question, where do you see the most significant pressure or the most critical opportunity for tenants? Is it a shifting political environment, new economic pressures on landlords, growing strength in organizing, et cetera, et cetera? Whoever would like to go.
Okay.
Okay.
Pressure / opportunity.
Someone hand me a mic, I'll go.
Oh yeah, I forgot we're sharing one.
Same thing for me. The increasing professionalization, corporatization, scope of landlords. Like landlords are becoming, increasingly a part of capital, like any other part of capital, run by companies, etc. This is a pressure because the landlord companies that we're looking into, they have really healthy balance sheets. They can weather a really long rent strike. They are able to borrow at prime rates. They're really stable companies. They're hard to knock over. Opportunity because their portfolios are huge, and that means they pool hundreds of thousands of tenants together into a common antagonistic relationship against a singular target. And it's a problem that I think we are not yet, we're just starting to think about cracking, right? There's been some successful examples. The Veritas tenants in San Francisco, the Tenant Union Federation has a campaign right now against Capital Realty Group. Latu obviously has made huge strides against landlords like K3 on a more local level, and we're trying to knock over equity, but it's something we're going to need to figure out. I think I'm excited because a lot of people are coming up with really interesting assaults on these companies.
Yeah, I can jump in. I wondered whether to share this or not, because in some ways it feels very peripheral to this conversation, but I think that's precisely why I want to share it, which is I actually think one threat that we're facing as a movement is the growing dominance of the abundance and YIMBY narrative. The idea that if we just unleash the private market and deregulate and build and build and build, that affordability is going to trickle down to the tenants we're talking about today. And the proponents of this narrative are actively working to weaken or block existing tenant protections. We had a big win today in City Hall. We upgraded the local rent stabilization ordinance, which was adopted in 1979 for the first time in decades. So now the highest rent threshold that the rent can be increased is 4%, whereas it was 8% before. And at the last minute, the YIMBYs tried to insert a loophole. And so that is what we're up against, and they are in some ways winning the narrative in the policy landscape. This is extremely true at the state level. They are, their views are the ones that our state legislatures are touting, and this is extremely problematic. Also because they treat working class people as acceptable collateral damage in their pursuit of building housing for future prospective middle class tenants. So they are very happy to be and so one of the loopholes they were trying to get through, not loophole, but one of the exceptions they were trying to get through in our LARSO vote today was that more or less, I don't know the specific technicalities of it, but basically if you were to redevelop an apartment building via the Ellis Act, those new units would not be subject to rent stabilization. Is something they wanted. And they said this new LARSO cap was going to prohibit building. And so I think we need to contest the terrain of these ideas as fiercely as we contest evictions, because they are a threat.
Woo. I think for me, one of those huge opportunities is the fact that this US hegemonic bloc is crumbling down.
Yeah.
I think that is something that we need to take clear advantage of. People now are seeing that this American dream has always been a fiction.
Yes.
And I think it is important for us to really capitalize on that. I don't know if y'all saw the TikToks I was posting all the time where mothers in Africa were saying, eat children, kids in America are starving, right?
Oh, that's so shit.
It is a reality. That is something that people could not conceive or imagine. The fact that they're giving $40 million to this Argentinian dictator versus ensuring SNAP benefits for its own citizens is something that we need to continue to push and have conversations around. I think that the opening of all of this gives us the opening to really have really open discussions with our community members. And I think that they are the one that we should be focusing on at the organizing local level. It's opening their minds that what we've been told about different models and different models of governance and organizing were lies. That Cuba, no matter what, everybody has food on their table. And it is because of US blockades that they can't feed enough food to their people. Not because of the lack of the will of the government, but because of a blockade. That in Venezuela, they're constantly doing these sanctions and taking away their resources. And that is the reason why they cannot do the comunas that they wish for. You know, that their electricity is going off and their internet's going off, not because they don't want to provide their people with the best that they can provide them with, but because their resources are being held hostage. These are the critical conversations we need to have, and we have a neighbor that we can look to. When they're giving money to the elderly and bringing elderly populations out of poverty because the government decides that that's where they want to invest their money in. When that government's taking resources like the oil industry back to the people and making sure that it serves people's needs and putting students through college. Those are the type of models that we need to start having conversations around. And I think that it's a huge opening for us to have those conversations in our communities now that this is crumbling down and people are starting to see the real face of the United States. Because for so many years, and I will tell you this, at some point when I was defending Fidel Castro with my mother, my mom told me, I was like, if you don't like it here, then why don't you go back to Mexico? My own mother. But that is the mentality a lot of our members and a lot of our people have. Because they felt that the United States gives you the opportunity, and that's not true. We work our asses off to have the little that we have. We work our asses off to pay the people we owe to have what we have. Because none of the shit that we have is ours. The car, we're still fucking paying it to the dealership. The TV, we're paying it to Curaçao. You know, the couches, the housing I live in, I'm paying it to a fucking landlord. Nothing that we own is ours. And that's why we also need to start talking about what it is that we are producing for ourselves. How do we take these means of production away from these capitalists? Because housing needs to be a human right. Access to water needs to be a human's right. Access to food needs to be a human right. And these bullshit austerity policies that they're passing over and over again, letting us know that there is not enough, it's bullshit. Here in California, and I mean, I'm not really a fan of Gavin Newsom, but he's right. We paid a shitload of taxes. We produce a shitload of food. We don't need them.
I have to interrupt. So speaking of shit ton of food, dare I say, we have food in the back. There's like less than 15 minutes.
Delicious.
Actually, my recommendation is while they're still here, if some people want to, please get food. Also, consider getting a little extra and then going and giving it away outside, please. because we want to use, we paid a lot of money for this food, we want to use all the food. Okay, please do that.
It's delicious.
Okay, actually, I also want to reserve time also for Q&A. So I'm sorry if I'm going to cut anyone off who had anticipated answering the question. But if anyone has this kind of open dialogue stuff, of course, we don't have cordless mics, unfortunately. I wish we could. So if you'll just speak up a bit loudly, or you can come up to the front if you want to use a mic. But you have a question here in front.
So I have multiple questions. Should I just do one question, or should I do two?
Do one.
Okay. What is your thought about how, like, I guess, preparations that you guys are taking in lieu of the AI bubble bursting, and how that's already been impacting like utility prices and water things, but also how that can also exacerbate like evictions once it bursts and all that?
Like real quick, it's really, I really do think that we do need to build and focus on community resistance. You know, food, transportation, communications, health, housing. That infrastructure is that's in this built environment is something that we cannot. Is not a guarantee. And thus, like, really, we do need to, like, band together, like, as a community and build that resistance. That's my short answer.
I'll be really quick. The crisis moment is already here. We are still recovering from the wildfires where we lost thousands of homes overnight, and people are either being evicted. People are already receiving eviction notices from not paying rent because they lost income or they stayed home because of ICE. There's literally a woman that we had fundraised for in July who self-deported last Monday because she got an eviction notice. So I would just say I'm not thinking about the future because the crisis is right in front of us right now. I think all of us on this panel are working to some extent on this eviction moratorium, and so we are building the networks. We are actually like coming in a coalition with like other autonomous tenant groups, like other tenant unions and like the broader county, to push and like demonstrate like a political machine that like the government needs to respond to. And so I think like what we're doing now in response to this crisis, which might seem micro, but I don't think it is, we are building the foundation to like, I think to like kind of stave off future crises that's going to impact housing. But yeah, I would say we're all kind of in the thick of it right now. Like this is a crisis state. People are being evicted right now.
Yeah.
Take it there.
Yeah. This is not as much of a question as it is to open the eyes for us all to realize that alone we can only do so little. And I want to first compliment each one of you on all you've done, all you've won, and all you've overcome, but we've just begun. And together, we're not only going to be better, we will weather all the stuff Trump dumps on us. And we must trust that together we can create awesomeness. But as I see here, each of us, I'm so glad that you all have come together in unity. But I'm working with so many 501c organizations that aren't here. LA Cans, Skid Row Care Campus, Urban Voices Project, Sharing Love, the Heart of LA. All these people are not, we're all doing each what we need to do. But we need what I see is my seed for you to breed and flower and get the power to actually make this happen, is to have one umbrella that we can have where people can see a website where each one of these organizations are working together, where they can go and see what's happening on each one of these days, where we can find a way for our imagination to have the creation so that we can actually come to a new destination of working together. I believe we can build a beautiful city that's not built just for the rich, but that's rich in love, that's built for all, that's built with compassion and humanity. This is what we can do, but we can't do it alone. We have to all have one home, one umbrella. And the way to make that happen is to get a celebrity, someone Keanu Reeves or Bruce Springsteen, that supports this, which is the face of the umbrella. You guys are thinking, I really believe that you have to make your dreams big. And what you're doing is really great, but it can be bigger. So if we had a celebrity, a musician, people that would speak for this umbrella, because right now, Skid Row is the #1 place in homelessness. And the whole world is looking to us for hopefulness. And we can do it. We can't do it by ourselves. And there are so many celebrities that are older that need to have a legacy. And their legacy would be to bring humanity to LA. So that's my thing for you guys to work on.
Thank you. That's incredible. Hi.
Hi. Yes. I am alone facing a giant predator slumlord who, because I dare to protect my rights, he's crushing me like a bug. And so they have taken everything away from me, not only my dignity, but I'm struggling to survive after 6 murder attempts. Anyway, my question to you is the strategy. I wish I'd found you earlier, but nobody really helped me. Actually, they help the landlord. Everybody I meet, they help the landlord who pays bribes and threatens. And so everybody is on their side. So now I think it's great that they should not be allowed to rent their apartment, that they maliciously have evicted the tenant and illegally evicted. So, but I say actually a little more. This landlord that do this, they should not be allowed to rent to anyone ever again. When they do something to threaten the life of a tenant, I lost my career, I lost everything. I have nothing. And he's forcing me to be homeless. And he's continue to displace me from everywhere I go. This is after 5 evictions that he did over me maliciously. So now I was asking your help because I'm going through hell right now, and he's continuing the campaign, the harassment campaign. They're abusing me. They are torturing me. This is torture I'm going through from a landlord. I'm being tortured right now as we speak. I cannot sleep. I go from place to place to place, and they follow me around. I need help, and I was wondering if there is anybody you can help me to liberate me from this slavery.
Yeah, hey, how are you? Nice to see you. I just will speak to that a little bit in honor of Jacob, who is not here today, who is my favorite tenant rights attorney in the city of Los Angeles and a good friend and comrade. As we talked about in these meetings, the courts, the media, functionally they are in service of a class that is not the class of tenants who are facing the worst conditions in this city. And so all of those are strategies that can be engaged, but I think what we've found in process, both downtown and also in the last 6 years that I've been a part of Latu, is that it really is those relationships. It's coming back to the meeting every week, it's continuing the conversations and building trust between one another so that we can face the worst of the worst things that these landlords throw at us. The persecution is real, the harassment is real. The tactics that I have witnessed, that I have been subjected to, have confused and alarmed and very deeply disoriented me over the course of my time in Los Angeles rental housing and before that. And I just think it's important to remember that we've got each other, and I've got you, and you're welcome every week, every Wednesday, and we'll keep this conversation going.
I have a question. I'm going through our lawful detainer at the moment. I had an eviction that we actually went through and worked out a payment. I gave them $13,000 to be able to stay. They waived 1 month, and we had a payment plan. So then when I went to pay the payment plan the month of, the front office denied my check. They denied the check because they said it was not the full amount of rent. But I have a contract that states that I have a certain amount to pay every first of the month for 18 months of a payment plan. With that said, I didn't know that they had sent me back to the courts. So I ended up having a court date to review from our last hearing. that I didn't comply. I'm not knowing it. I see it the next day. I end up going to court to see if I could place my answer, to put myself in front of a judge, but they had already said, the judge had already gave the order for the sheriff to be able to come out. I did get a chance I went to Long Beach and got to work at Better Help Center, and I did get to put myself in front of a judge, but the only thing I was able to do was see a judge for more time. So I'm not able to speak to him about staying. I'm only able to speak with him about having more time. Through that, is there a way that I can show I'm only in this position because they take the lump sums of money? Like, if they didn't take the 13,000 at the time they did, I could have easily just paid my rent every month on time with the payment. But since they knew me doing great due diligence by saying, hey, I get this big contract that's coming up, I'll be on time, they say, well, if you want to stay, we just want 13,000. So then it keeps me underneath, and it keeps me not paying on time. But it was okay, because my thing was, okay, they're saying I have to pay $850 every first of the month. And as long as I pay throughout the month, I'm okay, as long as I don't miss $850 at the first. But now I'm already back into the situation. Is there a way, is it the judge discrepancy of how I could ask for more time?
Well, in my experience dealing with cases like this, it's always really fucked up that when you're in a situation that you have to sign something because you feel pressure to sign it and agreeing to something that you're hoping you're gonna be able to keep. And the reality is that life gets in the way, shit happens, and the next month you cannot pay the amount that you said you were gonna pay. And unfortunately, judges are assholes. They don't give a fuck. You signed the contract and that's it, right? Like, if you don't comply with the contract, then they just give the ruling to the landlord. But one of the things that I would suggest, and I think that you need to look for a lawyer. We could give you Jacob's number. I know Lakla is taking on some cases now. But get a lawyer so the lawyer can revise your case and they can give you an actual advice on how to fight this or represent you in this case, so to ensure that you're able to stay and maybe renegotiate another deal for you.
Okay, I tried to see if I could get a lawyer, but they said where I'm at, I'm not in a priority zone.
Yeah, you'll have to find a lawyer outside of the stay housed system probably because of that, but we'll get you the contact information from somebody. It sounds like, I'm not, again, you definitely need a lawyer, but just based on what you were saying, you were trying to comply with the agreement, like you were complying with the agreement, and the landlord actually was the one violating the contract, so probably what is going to end up happening is you'll have to countersue them in a separate affirmative proceeding, and in your own case with this judge, there's something called a motion to set aside, which if you haven't been talked to about by anybody, you should be filing a motion to set aside, but you're definitely gonna need a lawyer to help out with this, because once you lose the default judgment, it becomes really hard just because they put so many barriers up.
Before the sheriff posts the notice, you need to set that motion.
Well, yeah, I have court on the 19th to show my answer.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have, if anyone has like specific tenant rights issues, there are going to be a couple of people who are going to stay for you to chat with afterward. I think.
I have a question. Back to the very beginning of this talk, and Chris, we were both offering perspectives on SROs, and you were saying that something to me was really intriguing. That you were like, well, we just have a different model, and we're able to like maintain a quality of life in this SRO building, even without any federal subsidy. And I think a lot of the story that you're sort of told about the SROs downtown in Skid Row is that sort of like, well, just the structure of it could never work, that you'll never get enough like income to possibly maintain the building. So that's, I mean, it seems like a really interesting counterexample. So I'm just curious to have some sort of dialogue between the two, like what's going on that you're doing that's so different than like what any of these SRO housing providers in Skid Row are doing? Like what's going on?
Great question.
No, but there's still.
Yeah, it was for you. It was like about your innovation with working with these new systems and.
It's hard. There are challenges. Like right now, so we're under construction on another project that doesn't have any public dollars, and it's in Chinatown, right behind Alpine Park. It's a shared housing. It's essentially like pods that we're creating, but each individual unit within pods of like 5 units. Each of those units have restrooms, because at least in our experience at the SRO in Little Tokyo, you know, oftentimes the tension, a lot of the tension, I don't know exact how like, are the restrooms, right? So we at least wanted to do that, and the living space in the kitchen is shared, right? We thought that it would be a model that we could replicate without using any public dollars, but I don't know if we can. Just given where the finances are, like philanthropy has shifted their priorities a bit around everything, and you know the foundation that we work with to make this happen is no longer, you know, they just shifted kind of like where they want to place some of their dollars. So I think there is still a way. I think it's just, I'm glad that you brought this up for Rossin, because like I think each individual case, building, location is different, but I think there are common themes that we should be sharing, we should be talking more. And you know, I'm gonna end with what I began earlier tonight, was like, we don't talk enough. Like it just sounds so obvious, but we really, really need to get back to kind of the basics and like create a unified front across everybody here, right? So, but Section 8 again, you know, it is under threat.
The whole system is broken.
Yeah.
And I guess the kind of flip of the question is sort of like, do you believe that it just sort of like doesn't possibly work, the SRO model in Skid Row, or like what's like, are they lying? Like why is the maintenance so far behind like what it should be? Like is it really because there's not income or what?
I think sometimes Law 2 specifically gets a bad rap that we always want to be in mortal combat with landlords 24/7, and that's like the end game here. The end game is safety and dignity and harmony in the buildings, and unfortunately the conditions as they currently are make that very challenging to achieve. What I can speak to specifically is my experience with SRO Housing Corporation. Obviously there are a lot of different players in this field. I do feel on a deep and fundamental level there is not alignment on the values of the work that we are doing in the tenants union and that of the SRO Housing Corporation. I think that's reflected in their behavior, in their avoidance, in their combativeness and harassment. I think it's also reflected economically. Something that has been a very interesting rallying cry to engage tenants in the Rossin Hotel around is the fact that the CEO of SRO Housing Corporation is making over $500,000 a year in salary and expenses and other fees. Meanwhile, the elevators don't work, the fire alarms don't go off, the sprinklers don't go off. Tenants are literally dying as a result of the conditions in the buildings. And we've got someone in a position of power who will respond when we email her directly. That has been some progress that we've seen throughout this campaign in the hotel. But fundamentally, I don't think believes in the dignity of the people that she is purportedly serving. And that is where there is a lot of friction and a lot of continued misalignment between the work that we're trying to do and the power that we're trying to build in the building, and the obstacles and maneuvers that we face. Even when they agreed to meet with us, they were still actively trying to evict several tenants. There was a case that went on for over a year and a half. And based on the technicalities of the case, that eviction should never have been filed, but it was, because it's a conscious demobilizing and disorganizing strategy. You get people trapped in the rigors of eviction court, they're not going to have as much capacity to do the work of building things collectively. So I think for me, right now, where we are in this specific building, that is the core tension, and I don't quite know how we resolve it, but we're certainly going to keep trying.
I think since we're over time, we're going to close out. But I know that if you've had.
Can we
can
just
you
do
something
something
briefly?
real quick? We do a mystica
Yes.
before entering or
Go ahead.
closing a space, but I think it's always important to leave with something a bit more positive.
Yes, yes.
And there's a song, and I would like for all of us to stand and sing together. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. I went down to the government house and I took back what they stole from me. Took back my dignity. Took back my humanity. I went down to the welfare office and I took back what they stole from me. Took back